In exactly 5 minutes, this radio station is scheduled to go live on air to broadcast a victory speech by the regional premier, Chief Samuel Ladoka Akintola. However, that victory speech, even before it is broadcast, is perceived by many to be a lie. And the truth is, Akintola, in collaboration with election officials and members of his political party, had just rigged the regional election to his favor. Outside the street was pure chaos. The roads were covered in thick black smoke, and the intoxicating smell of burning tires and petrol filled the air. This was unprecedented in the history of Nigeria as a young independent country. This is Operation Wetie. Wetie is a Yoruba word which means soak him or wet him. Mobs were drenching political opponents in fuel and setting them on fire, and also setting their property on fire. This violence was a reaction to a broken system. The 1965 election results that were announced were not the choice of the people. The results did not reflect how they voted, and so to the masses, Wetie had become the solution to corruption. This is what happens when the ballot box is rigged and the government attempts to silence the voices of the people. On this day, politics simply moved from the polling units to the streets. Democracy had just started in the new independent country, but it was already failing, and failing so badly. But unlike the streets, the atmosphere of the radio station was chill and calm. Inside the air-conditioned studio, the duty officer Akinwande Oshin had in his hand the master tape of the premiere which he intended to play next. In 1960s Nigeria, the radio was the ultimate authority. The people believed whatever they heard on radio. Since there were speakers wired into almost every household and radios are in almost every home and market, everyone would hear the tape play. Everyone will listen to the speech of the premier, and it will be like he is speaking directly to the people. Once he makes his broadcast, the stolen election becomes accepted as a fact. The fake election results become the official truth, and this corruption becomes their reality. But all of a sudden, the radio door opens. A 31-year-old man walks in. He has a thick beard. He isn't wearing a mask, and he is holding a revolver. To this day, no one truly knows whether his weapon was loaded or if it was even a fake gun. But the only thing Akinwande Oshin felt in that studio that night was fear, with multiple thoughts running through his head. Who was this armed man, and what did he want in the radio station? Welcome to today's edition of Back in History. In this edition, we take you back to the night a young playwright and university lecturer named Wole Soyinka hijacked a government radio station at gunpoint to stop a stolen election. But how audacious was this move? And who was Wole Soyinka in 1965? Wole Soyinka was just a man. He wasn't a military commando. He wasn't a thug or agbero hired by a wealthy politician. Wole Soyinka was simply a 31-year-old intellectual. He had studied English literature at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. He was a Rockefeller Research Fellow, the founder of a prestigious drama troupe, and a university lecturer. To the Nigerian public, he was a man of the arts, a playwright who wrote beautiful plays and made brilliant stage dialogue. Nobody saw him as a rebel who could storm into radio stations and hold people up at gunpoint, which is exactly why state security never saw him coming. In October 1965, the Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service building wasn't an ordinary radio station. It was Premier Akintola's personal megaphone. And because the streets of Ibadan had turned to war zones, the building had turned into an armed fortress heavily guarded by anti-riot policemen. But security forces are trained to look for a specific type of threats. They were looking for angry mobs with machetes and petrol bombs. These were their targets, not a reserved, well-dressed 31-year-old intellectual walking calmly towards the entrance. And this is the psychology that Soyinka understood. The psychology of state security. If you can just act like you belong, like you are one of them, then you become invisible. He completely bypassed the armed perimeter. He navigated the corridors and he walked straight into the studio. Inside the studio, Oshin, who was the duty officer, was sitting at the control desk. The master tape of the premier speech was loaded on the machine ready to be played. Soyinka did not yell. He did not make a grand theatrical speech. He simply pulled out his weapon and handed Oshin a different audio tape, giving him specific instructions. The instructions were cold and direct, that he should take Akintola's tape off, put this one on, and play it now. Oshin swapped out the heavy tape machine as ordered. He was full of terror, fear in his eyes. At exactly 7:00 p.m., millions of people listened to their radios. They gathered around their speakers expecting the premier to announce that the election was safe, waiting to hear him say that everything was fine and that nothing went wrong and that the election was free and fair. But instead, what they heard was a deep, commanding, unfamiliar voice cutting through the audio waves. The exact audio recording of that broadcast is lost to history, but the documented transcripts survive. The message did not ask for a recount of the ballots. It did not plead for peace. It simply said, quote, "Akintola, get out. The people of the West do not want you. Take your political thugs and leave." End of quote. In under 3 minutes, Soyinka used the government's own expensive radio system and propaganda machine against them. Soyinka had successfully hijacked the government's network. This wasn't an action movie. It was not a Nollywood film with barricades and standoffs. There was no big shootout or hostage situation. Without any drama, Soyinka simply pocketed the premier's tape, put away his gun, and walked past the armed guards into the Ibadan night. He vanished into the dark, and that was the moment the manhunt began. Because of that break-in, on the night of October 15, there was now a target on Wole Soyinka's back. That was how Wole Soyinka instantly became the most wanted man in Nigeria. The entire operation of seizing a whole radio station took less time than a commercial break. And you may be wondering what actually happened to the original tape, the one with the premier speech. Well, no one knows till this day. The whereabouts of the tape has turned into a mystery, and that mystery has grown into the Ibadan legend. Some say it was tossed over the bridge, but Soyinka himself later suggested it had simply vanished to ensure that the premier's lie would never be broadcast ever again. But you cannot humiliate a government like that and just walk away. Within hours, the police were mobilized and the premier was furious. The government's reaction was absolute panic. Contemporary newspaper reports from the time did not even know who to blame. The unknown intruder was described as a mystery gunman. The regional government searched the entire territory for this mystery man. The very idea that Wole Soyinka was a suspect, that a celebrated scholar could be this gun-wielding rebel, seemed impossible to the press. Even though Soyinka was already a controversial fellow before then because of his activism, the police genuinely did not believe a university lecturer would pull off an armed heist. However, he was arrested days later and got dragged into what would become the trial of the decade. On December 21, 1965, Soyinka was cleared of treason charges and walked free. But how? How did he beat the charge of high-stakes treason? This is what Soyinka did. He won his case by creating doubts. The hijacker wore a thick beard, but Soyinka was clean-shaven when he was arrested. This is one of the most famous parts of the trial. Professor Jeffrey Axworthy, Soyinka's HOD at the University of Ibadan, testified that he was with a clean-shaven Soyinka just before the incident. The judge, Justice Kayode Shaw, famously ruled that it was biologically impossible for a man to grow a bushy beard in 2 hours. Because of this, the main witness could not confidently identify Soyinka. When the prosecution star witness Akinwande Oshin, who was a duty officer, was brought to the stand, his testimony began to crumble. He could not consistently identify the gunman, and the defense argued that the man Oshin saw was much taller than Soyinka. With such weak evidence, the judge had to let him go. A simple shave and his theater skills helped Wole Soyinka to outsmart the Nigerian justice system. For decades, Soyinka never officially confessed because he had been cleared in court. But recently, the truth came out. In recent years, notably around his 86th and 90th birthdays, when journalists asked how he broke into the station, he corrected them, quote, "I never broke into the radio station. I sneaked in. The radio station was holding on to something that belonged to the people, and I decided to retrieve it." End of quote. Wole Soyinka walked free, but the country was still in chaos. The country was still burning. The government had lost all control after the fake election. Violence continued in the streets, and the rigged election had ruined public trust. Wole Soyinka's hijack was not a mere stunt. It exposed the fragile system and proved that the government was so weak it could not even protect its own radio station from one armed man. As a matter of fact, exactly 26 days after Soyinka was acquitted, the entire Nigerian system collapsed. January 15, 1966, the military stepped out of the barracks. A group of young army officers launched Nigeria's first military coup. They systematically targeted the political leaders who had rigged the system. They drove to the Premier's lodge in Ibadan. The same Premier Samuel Ladoke Akintola, who had tried to force his victory speech onto the radio just 3 months earlier. The soldiers breached his compound and a serious gunfire broke out. Akintola was shot and killed. The first Nigerian Republic was officially dead, and for the man Soyinka, he did not just survive the fallout of 1965. When the Nigerian Civil War erupted shortly after, he was arrested again for trying to negotiate a peace deal and spent 22 grueling months in solitary confinement. But they couldn't break him. He kept writing, he kept fighting, and in 1986, he made history again as the first African to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature. Today, he is in his 90s, an elder statesman of global literature with white hair, sitting in international universities, writing brilliant work. But history is not clean, and it is not polite. In 1965, Soyinka was a 31-year-old man who looked at a corrupt government and took a huge risk by walking past their armed guards and manually shutting down the propaganda. He did not write a poem about the rigged election. Instead, he stopped the broadcast. He faced the obstacle head-on. This is the reality of our history. It is built on raw, physical action. I am your friend and host Ekemini Udim, thanking you for watching this edition of Back in History. If you want more unfiltered stories about the events that built this country and the continent of Africa, hit the subscription button. I will see you in the next episode.